Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. All right, just for starters, I'm going to skip this week's hero. Reason being, well, two reasons. First of all, I'm a little under the weather. And second reason is that I wanted to give some time for the Q&A. Because I'm looking at this box, and every week I'm throwing questions in it, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, and, Anyhow, so I wanted to actually cover that. Now, before I get into all the questions in here, I think it's important that we have some sort of prerequisites. Like, you can ask questions, and feel free to ask all the questions you want. But you should know that there's certain prerequisites when it comes to questions, right? And I've actually just listed 3. The first prerequisite, when we're going to ask questions and when we're going to get the answer, the first one is to check yourself and check the status of your heart. Because the thing is, when it comes to asking a question, there's different modes in which your heart will go through. And you have to ask yourself, how much do you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because that will determine how much of a receptacle your heart will be to those questions, to the answer to those questions. How much do you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And we've spoken about a certain ayah, which had those 8 categories. I don't know if you guys remember it. But basically, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ أَبَاءُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُكُمْ وَأَشِيرَتُكُمْ. Say that if your fathers, your children, your brothers, your wives, your kindred, the wealth in which you have gained, the commerce in which you fear a decline, أَحَبَّ إِلَيْكُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَجِهَادِ فِي سَبِيلِهِ is more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and struggling and striving in His way. فَتَرَبَّصُوا, then wait. Wait for what? حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ, wait for the punishment of Allah Azza wa Jalla to come down. So I said that the scholars say that it's because the love of one of these 8 things is more beloved to the person, and that is the reason that a person sins. In other words, when you check the status of your heart and say, okay, do I love Allah more, or do I love, let's say, the first category, your fathers? And here we're talking about parents. So let's say now you've got this criteria. What happens sometimes is that you will be in a state where your parents will be telling you certain things, certain cultural practices, right, that have crept in. And your parents say you have to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then your parents, you love them, you want to obey them. But certain things are actually running antagonist against what Allah Azza wa Jalla has ordered, right? You see a lot of these like weddings, and this just, when I go to some of these weddings, it's just insane, how much wrong is going on. We'll just leave it at that, right? And sometimes what happens is you might think, look, what's going on over there is jacked up, but my parents really want me to do it. So now you're checking the status. All right, do I love Allah Azza wa Jalla more, or do I love my parents more? And the criteria here is that you love Allah Azza wa Jalla more. And if you look at, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But anyway, so your parents, your children, you guys don't have children, so you don't have to worry about it. But what happens a lot of times is certain parents, in order to be down with their kids, to be the cool parents, when their children start saying things, and they start saying like, oh, mom, I want to do this and I want to do that, they'll put the deen of Allah Azza wa Jalla aside just to fulfill their children's wishes. And you see that a lot, unfortunately, in this day and age. So it's not now, the parent isn't trying to be a parent, but they're actually trying to be your friend, which is good. I mean, if your parents are your friends, good. But realize that they're still your parents as well. That's the second thing. The third thing, your siblings will have a certain pressure upon you, right, to do certain things. Again, checking the status. And the categories go on. But now, so the first criteria is establishing whether you truly love Allah Azza wa Jalla or not. When you're going to ask questions, there's certain things about asking questions and saying, okay, I truly want the answer because I want to see what will truly please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second thing is just saying, okay, well, I just want to ask a question just to see what the answer is, right? Two different situations. The second thing, any single answer you get, and this is what happens when you ask different people the same question. Sometimes you get a whole bunch of different answers, right? We have some of the questions we have here, and they've been asked by many people, I'm sure. Very popular questions. But there's a criteria, there's a standard by which you can measure who is correct and who isn't correct. And this standard will also come up when we start talking about some of the groups and sects. People had a question about the Shia and Ahmadiyya and things like that. But here's the standard. and listen to this carefully, the standard by which you can truly know whether someone is giving you the right answer or not is whether they've met the standard of the companions, of the ashab, of the sahaba, radiyallahu anhum majma'in. Now, why do I say that? Think about it for a second. Before I get into the direct proofs of why the Prophet ﷺ said that, who were the people that sacrificed the most for this deen? It was the sahaba. I mean, if you look at the story of, for instance, Khabbab ibn Arat. One day Khabbab ibn Arat, he was one of the very early companions. And he was, in a gathering with Umar ibn Khattab. And this is way after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And Umar ibn Khattab said, tell me some of the suffering or some of, what you went through in those early days. Now, Khabbab ibn Arat, he didn't say anything to Umar ibn Khattab. He merely took off his shirt and showed him his back. And when he showed him his back, what he saw was like clumps of his back missing practically. I mean, just chunks of his back. And when he asked him, when Umar ibn Khattab asked Khabbab ibn Arat, radiyallahu anhuma, when Umar ibn Khattab asked what happened, he said, you see, in those very early days, the kuffar, the Quraysh, they took me out in the middle of the desert, dragging me across the hot sand. And then they put up a fire, and they had these coals on this fire. And they took me and placed me right over this fire. And I continued to burn. And the only thing that let out the fire that day was the blood and the fat that came out of my back. This was Khabbab ibn Arat. Now, you have to imagine, what sort of a person, what sort of sacrifice would a person have to do? How much love for Allah and His deen and the Prophet ﷺ would they have to have? So if you're looking for a standard, the standard is the companions. When you had, for instance, okay, you're talking about maybe older companions, some of the younger companions. Abdurrahman ibn Auf one day, when they're in one of the battles, and these two young kids, maybe 10 or 11 years old, they both come up on the two sides of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and they start tugging on him. And they said to him, yeah, oh my uncle, where's Abu Jahl? Now if you remember, Abu Jahl was one of the greatest enemies of Islam. Now they're in the midst of the battle, right? All the fighting is going on, the swords are, everything's happening. And he's saying, he goes, what do you two want? What do you two youngsters want with Abu Jahl? They said, we heard that Abu Jahl cursed the Prophet ﷺ. And we swear that if we find Abu Jahl, we will kill Abu Jahl. And though he said, I saw in the distance Abu Jahl riding his horse, I said, there's Abu Jahl, go for Abu Jahl. He said, both of these two young people went for Abu Jahl. One took down the horse, and outside and around that, Abdullah ibn Masud came and took off the head of Abu Jahl. These two youngsters. One of these youngsters, one of these narrates himself. He says that in the midst of the battle, one of the kuffar, now how old did I say they were? 10 or 11, 12 maybe. He said, one of the kuffar cut my arm. But when he cut it, it wasn't cut all the way. It was still hanging by a piece of flesh. He said, I continued to fight, continued to go through the enemy until my arm became so annoying that I took it, I stepped on it, and I ripped it out of my shoulder. And I continued on. What kind of sacrifice would these people have? We tend to think of our lives and, man, it's so tough. We have to come to the masjid and pray. These are the people that sacrificed everything. Their lives, their wealth, their families. We spoke about in the first session, we spoke about Mus'ab ibn Umair. He lost his mother pretty much. She told him, pick between Islam and pick between me. And he chose Islam. So the love and the passion that these people had for Islam, it's unmatchable. And so if you want to look at a standard by which, that what is the correct answer to some of these questions, look at the actions of the companions. Now that's not me saying that, right? Obviously, when I'm saying that, I'm saying logically it makes sense. But even the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said that this ummah would divide into 73 sects. And I think I mentioned this hadith. All of them are in the hellfire except one. Now, nowadays, if you were to tell someone that, usually they go to, so what are the 72 sects? Can you name them? But that's a completely illogical question. You want a logical question, not who's going to the hellfire, but who's going to paradise. Which one of the sects is going to paradise so that I can model my life after that? And that's what the Sahaba asked. Which one of these sects of Islam is heading towards paradise? And the Prophet ﷺ said, those who are upon what I am upon and what my companions are upon. What was the criteria? What I'm upon, the Sunnah, right? You have many groups. We're upon the Quran and the Sunnah. But the Prophet ﷺ didn't stop there. What I'm upon and what my companions are upon. And aside from that, the Prophet ﷺ said that the best of people, khairun nas qarni, thumma ladina yulunahum, thumma ladina yulunahum. The best of people is my generation. then the one following that, then the one following that. So that key, that standard, when we're looking at these questions, is what would the companions do? Okay? The third thing, and then we'll get to the question, promise. Be careful about looking for loopholes. Okay? And that's kind of tied to point number 1. It goes back to checking the status of your heart. Be careful with looking for loopholes. Because this is what Bani Israel, the Jews beforehand, did. If you guys remember the story of the Sabbath, right? Yom as-Sabt. And you remember that Allah Azza wa Jal ordered the Jews not to fish on this day from a certain water body. Not to fish. Now, they thought they were pretty clever. So they said, you know what? We'll hook up some nets. We'll get, technological on it. And we won't be fishing on Yom as-Sabt, on Saturday. But when the fish come, the nets will catch them. The thing was that on Saturday, that's when the most fish came. So it was a big test for them. Now, what were they trying to do? They were trying to find a loophole, right? So they kind of got that net, they got it set up, and they would get the fish, and they'd, say, this is great. We're following the law of Allah, and we're also getting our fish, right? They thought they got the loophole. But what does Allah Azza wa Jal say? That Allah Azza wa Jal converted them or caused them to become monkeys, despised and dejected. That's what they ended up as. So there's one thing about the letter of the law, especially in some of the questions we're going to be going through. What is the proof? You always hear people say, does it say this in the Quran? I hear this from a lot of older uncles too. I get it all the time, right? Beta, where in the Quran is it? And it's as if the person is trying to say, look, if it's not written, by such and such his name, right? Salim Saab, whatever the guy's name is. Salim Saab, you cannot do this, and it's in the Quran, I won't follow it, right? But there's something about the spirit of the law, the letter of the law, and the spirit of the law. And you have to make sure you're in congruence with both of them. You have to make sure that both of them are standards, right? So avoid looking for loopholes. So there were 3 things. What did I say? Check the status of your heart, the standard of the companions, radiyallahu anhum majma'in, and be careful with finding loopholes. With those loopholes, the other thing, just as an extension of that, what usually happens when it comes to loopholes is your desires are now taking over. Because you want something so badly to be halal. So badly to be halal, you're trying to now look for different, this sheikh so-and-so said it's halal, sheikh so-and-so said it's halal. I'm trying to look for some way just to make it halal. Why? Not because you have this sincere love for Allah Azza wa Jal, perhaps, but because your desires are now taking over. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that paradise is surrounded by hardship, and the hellfire is surrounded by desires. So those things that are extremely hard, you'll find that that's what surrounds paradise. Now, in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ also said about this dunya, about this world. He said, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir." That this world is a prison for the believers and a paradise for the disbelievers. If you think about it, non-Muslims, they don't have all the restrictions we have. They can live it up, they can party, they can, go out with whoever they want, do whatever they want. Now for the Muslim, it becomes really hard. Or at least they think, right? It's interesting, just a side note. There's one, I believe it's Hasan al-Basri or it was like Imam Shafi, I don't really remember. But he was one day, he was somewhat wealthy and he was riding his horse. And a Jewish man who was just in, his clothes were shattered. I mean, they were tattered clothes and he looked really disheveled and in a really poor state. And this Jewish man came to Imam Shafi or Hasan al-Basri, whoever it was, and he said, look, here you are, you're wealthy and you have all the things in life and I'm so poor. Didn't your prophet say that this dunya is a prison for the believers and a paradise for the disbelievers? So Hasan al-Basri said, yes. He said, so how do you explain you being wealthy and myself being poor? And listen to the to the answer of whether it's Hasan al-Basri or Imam Shafi. He said, compared to paradise, no matter how much wealth I have here, I'm in a prison. And no matter how bad things are in this world, compared to the hellfire, you're in paradise. And this man heard that, he said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. That was enough for him, right? Anyhow, so the 3 points, just to reiterate. Checking the status of your heart, and that's something that each and every single one of you is upon you. There's nothing I can do. I can't open your heart and say, okay, I can tell you the answer because your heart's in good standing. I can't do that. That's upon each and every single one of you. Checking the status of your heart, how much do you love Allah Azza wa Jal? Do you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than anything else? Or are there other things that you love more than Allah? Second thing, the standard is the companions. That's something that you don't want to leave, not only from here, not only the questions today, but even in the future. When it comes to different groups, different sects, different people telling you different things, the one thing to ask yourself or ask them, did the companions do it? What was their understanding of this Quranic ayah or whatever it may be? The third thing, don't look for loopholes. Okay. So with that said, let the games begin. Okay. By the way, do you guys have paper? Yeah? Okay. If you guys have questions, you can start sending them, or I guess give them to Fahad here. And on the sister side, I guess you can just leave them right there, inshallah. All right, I'm going to get to the older questions first, and then if we're able to gun through those, then we'll get to the newer questions. All right, and I've kind of grouped them together. Just leave them right there, inshallah. Wow. Oh, those are blank, okay. All right, so there were a couple of sisters, and they asked, one person asked, is hijab mandatory? Why? Is it guna? Is it a sin if you don't wear hijab? Okay, good question. Now, the one thing that I wanted to start off with is, look, if you're worried about what the people will say when you wear hijab, then this is the wrong approach. Meaning that the people should be the last thing you should be worried about. And like I said in point number 1, was your love of Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So if the people are what's worrying you, and you're saying, look, what will so and so say about me? What will my parents say? Sometimes even the parents say, look, why do you have this hijab on? This is something that's whatever they might say, it's backwards or whatever it may be. Don't worry about the people. Worry about what your Creator has obligated upon you. So what has Allah Azza wa Jal said? In the Quran, Allah says, and I'll just say the translation, and tell the believing women to lower their gaze. By the way, the ayah before this, it says, tell the believing men to lower their gaze. So it's upon you guys to lower your gaze first. Anyway, and then later on it goes, and tell the believing women to lower their gaze and protect their private parts, and do not show off their adornment except only for that which is apparent. Okay, then we'll get into that in a second. And not to reveal their adornment except to their husbands, their fathers, their husbands' fathers, their sons, yada, yada. There's a whole category of people. All right, now, the ayah itself, if you look at it and the words that are used in the ayah, and the word that's of particular contention when people say that, look, hijab, you have some people that say, look, hijab, you don't have to worry about it. And the word that comes up that has a particular contention is this word, jayubihinna, which is, what it means is to cover the outside. Now, it's a general word. It's not something that, specifically says cover X, Y, and Z. But now if we want to look at the understanding of the companions, and remember I said that was the yardstick by which we want to look at it. Aisha radiallahu anha, and listen to what she has to say. She said that the women of the Quraysh are good, but by Allah, I have never seen any better than the women of the Ansar. Now, if you were here last time, you remember we said that the Ansar were the women in Medina, and the Quraysh were the women that had come and made hijrah to Medina. All right? So Aisha radiallahu anha says, the women of the Quraysh are good, but by Allah, I've never seen any better than the women of the Ansar, or any who believed in the book of Allah, the Quran, more strongly, or had more faith in the revelation. When Surah An-Nur was revealed, the one I just spoke about, and she quotes it, and draw their veils over their jayubihinna, okay, their menfolk came to them and recited to them what had been revealed. And there was not one woman among them who did not go to her apron, in other words, her clothing, and the following morning they prayed wrapped up as if they were crows on their heads. Meaning the whole city of Medina, you saw that the women, once this ayah was revealed, especially the Ansar, they basically covered themselves up. And the city of Medina, in other narrations, Aisha radiallahu anha says the city of Medina was as if there were crows walking around. Meaning this is how they interpret this ayah. And of course, Aisha radiallahu anha also says in another place, she talks about this idea of the women and how they cover themselves. It wasn't just, okay, now we've got a blanket and we're going to head out. That's it. But she talked about them covering themselves, even covering their faces. Now, I know it's a difference of opinion whether you should cover your face or not. But the general hijab, according to what Aisha radiallahu anha said, and other amongst the sahabiyat, is that the covering of the hijab is everything except the hands and, like I said, the face. And there's a difference of opinion on the face. Now, some people are under the misconception that the feet you can also leave uncovered. But this is actually a misconception. They take this from, I believe, one of the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa, who was one of the founders of, one of the schools of Islamic law, where he said the feet can be uncovered. However, even that, the reason he said the feet can be uncovered is because he said that the outer garment should be long enough so the feet are actually covered. So intrinsically, the same purpose is served. What I would say is that in this day and age, depending on the length, if your outer covering is so long that it'll cover your feet, you're good to go. But I would say that if that's not the case, you probably want to put on some socks so your feet are covered, especially when you're praying. Just in terms of some of the conditions of hijab. Number one, like I said, everything should be covered except the face and the hands. And you want to make sure that what you're wearing is loose-fitting. It's not something that's, just super, super, super tight as if you're wearing nothing. The Prophet ﷺ, once he said that, talking to the companions, he said, a time will come upon you where you will see people who are naked but clothed. And at that time, it didn't really seem to make sense. And the ulama, the scholars say that if you look around now, really, the garments that people wear, and women and men, you guys know about like skinny jeans and stuff like that. SubhanAllah. Anyway, so everything is just so tight-fitting, as if, I tell some of the brothers, I'm like, look, it's like someone took like a vacuum, stuck it in the dude's jeans, it just gets sucked on the, it's amazing. Anyhow, so the point is that for the hijab, this is the hijab for the women and the men, is that it needs to be something loose-fitting. You shouldn't be showing all your body parts. Okay. Second thing is that the cloth that you have shouldn't be like a see-through cloth, right? So you've got your hijab, it's loose-fitting, but you can see everything right through it. Okay. Anyhow, so those are some of the things about hijab, and there's a whole bunch of proofs and evidences and things like that. And if you want, we can talk about that later. Did anyone amongst the sisters want me to expound upon any aspect? Or you can write it and let me know later, inshallah. Okay, the second question, another popular one. Okay, this one I'm going to take later. Okay, is all music haram? Like playing the guitar and the piano, etc., etc. All right, so the very popular music question. All right, let me ask you guys this. Before I get to music, and whether it's haram or halal or what or whatnot, I want you guys to do me a favor. I'm going to recite some lines, and I want you guys, sisters included, and you can do this in your own minds or if you want to say it out loud, I want you guys to complete the sentence. And let's see if you guys can do it. So we'll start off with, who let the... All right. We're bringing blank back. He said, if you want to keep it in your mind, you're free to do so. What else? I don't know. I have been far away from it. Anyone want to... Hottest, you want to help me out? Somebody? There you go. All right. Anyways, you guys get the idea. All right, you guys get the idea. Basically, like stuff like this, you can easily... like I said, I'm not really familiar with a lot of the stuff that's being listened to. I just I read about it. Anyway. Now, let's ask yourselves this. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ. How many people are going to say, فَاتَّبِعُونِي? Well, that's what it is. Now, this is the Quran, right? Now, let's say, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ. Okay, good. All right. تَبَارِكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ. Excellent, good. All right. My point with all of that was basically, here's what you're looking at, right? Now, before we get to halal, haram, is music, what is the standard of music? I think most people generally know that when it comes to music, it becomes ingrained in the person's, you could practice say, soul. There's songs that I heard 20 years ago, right? That to this day, I still remember them. The lyrics go through my head. They're just stamped in my head. And so you have to ask yourself, look, if this is how much Quran I know, but I know the lyrics to all of these songs, how much benefit is there really in music? Someone once said it's like chewing gum for the ears. There's no benefit, right? And on the day of judgment, think about it. Where will music be? I think most people already know the answer to this question about is music haram, right? Without getting into the proofs and all of this other thing. But for the benefit of those who say, no, it's difference of opinion, yada, 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 you always hear this. When it comes to the Quran, Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَشْتَرِي لَهُ, right? That of mankind is he who purchases idle talk, lahu, right? To mislead men from the path of Allah. Now, lahu could be anything, right? Misleading talk or idle talk. I mean, you could say, if you really wanted music to be halal, you would say, look, misleading talk is just talking about stuff that's just, boring or not relevant to my life or whatever. But now remember, what do we say the second criteria was? What was the understanding of the Sahaba? And listen to what Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said. He said, this means singing. Clear as day. He didn't say this might mean singing. Now who is Abdullah ibn Abbas? Abdullah ibn Abbas was the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said that he would have the best understanding of the Quran. The best understanding. Right? So it's not only just a companion, but it's one of the companions that has the best understanding. And he's telling you and I that this ayah is talking about singing. All right. In another ayah, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, and befool them, and it's where Allah Azza wa Jal is talking to shaitan. And he tells shaitan, and befool them gradually with those whom you can, amongst them with your voice. So Allah Azza wa Jal is basically telling shaitan, look, you want to make them go astray. If you want to fool them, you can do so, and you can try with your voice. Question, what is the voice of shaitan? What could it be? Could it be just talk? What could it be? You would think there's some sort of sound, something's coming out. Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't waste words. He would have said you could befool people with whatever, but he said with your voice, specifically. Now, what did Mujahid say? Listen to this. He said his voice is singing and falsehood. SubhanAllah. Abdullah ibn Abbas, again, when he started talking about, and later on this ayah talks about his cavalry, his infantry, he says that his infantry is everyone who walks to disobey Allah, etc. Anyway, finally, and this is the hadith I mentioned last time, the Prophet ﷺ said that among my ummah, there will come a people, right? He's talking about the future now. There will come a people who will make the haram halal. They will try their best to make the haram into the halal. They'll try to make zina, right? Fornication, halal. They'll try to make drinking, alcohol, halal. And they will try to make the playing of musical instruments halal. Now notice he didn't say he will make music halal. He went a step beyond, before that he will make the playing of musical instruments. So the person asks a question, are guitars amongst music? Are pianos amongst music? The Prophet ﷺ has clearly stated here, musical instruments. And the interesting thing, what I say to people is that, look, when you're getting into is it halal or is it haram, and you're really trying to make it halal, you're actually fulfilling this very hadith. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that amongst my ummah, there will come a people who will do this. And so when you're getting into that, you're actually becoming one of those people that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. Wallahu al-musta'an. Okay, now that's the deal with music. Let me just qualify that real quick. Now, is all music haram? And the answer is that all music is not haram. Okay? Well, let me rephrase that. All music is haram with the exception of the human voice. Okay? If you have something with the human voice, and if there is a duff that you can sing along with the human voice, but there's a difference of opinion when it comes to the duff. The duff, by the way, is like a drum. It's open from one side and it's closed from one side. Okay? The difference of opinion goes like this, and that is that one group of scholars say that it's permitted across the board. In other words, as long as the lyrics are okay, we're not talking about someone's mother and whatever the garbage people talk about nowadays, right? So as long as the lyrics are okay, you can basically sing human voice along with the duff. That's one group of scholars. The second group of scholars says that no, it's for the men, it's okay to use the voice, but no duff. For the women, and of course this is when they're amongst themselves, they can go ahead and sing and use the duff. Okay? The difference of opinion comes up when there was a time when, I believe it was during Eid, when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh walked into some of the women amongst the companions, and they were singing and they were playing their drum or whatever, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh got very upset. Now, just before we go there, why did he get upset? If music was such a great thing, you'd think, well, he should have been okay with it, but he wasn't. So he gets upset, but the Prophet ﷺ tells him that, look, it's okay. Today's Eid, right? I'm paraphrasing. Today's Eid. Let them sing and let them do that. So one group of scholars said, look, this is only for the women because the hadith is clear that this is targeting the women only, right? Another group of scholars says, no, we can use this generally. Point being, it's a difference of opinion. And what I would say is, look, don't waste your time with music, just as a baseline thing, right? I mean, music isn't something as great as people make it out to be. Some of the statements of the companions, right? They said that it was Sawtu Shaitan, it was the voice of Shaitan. The Quran of the Shaitan. It was the call of Shaitan. Basically, they attached it to the Shaitan, always. And on top of that, many of the companions, when they're asked, they consider it something effeminate, something of a female nature. That's for you fellas, right? So if you're singing and dancing, they consider that something that, generally it's restricted to females. That was generally how they looked at it. Anyways, wallahu alam. All right, why is music haram? Let's skip that one. Okay. Can I have advice on how you can be kind to and respect your parents if you don't respect them as a person? Okay. It's a good question, because what happens a lot of times is that, look, let's be frank. Your parents are not the most perfect human beings on the planet. But guess what? Neither are you and I. Okay? So they're going to do things that, you might really annoy you. And maybe some things that are clearly like forbidden in Islam, let's say, that they're doing these things. But coming back to my first point about this love of Allah, Allah Azza wa Jal has ordered us to be kind to our parents. And that's a command from Allah. Right after speaking about not associating anything with Allah, shirk with Allah, to not do that, Allah Azza wa Jal has said to be kind to the parents. To not even say uff to your parents. And so, I remember there was a story of a man. I believe it wasn't a companion, but it was a man who was alive at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, if I can get the story right. And anyway, so this individual, basically, what happened was that he wasn't able to see the Prophet ﷺ during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ told Umar ibn Khattab that if so-and-so comes to you, ask him to make dua for you, because Allah Azza wa Jal will fulfill his dua. Now, it goes back, if I've got the story correct, that this man, basically, he had taken his mother for Hajj. And he took his mother on Hajj from Yemen. And it wasn't that he just took his mother, but he had to carry his mother because she had a hard time walking. All the way from Yemen to Mecca, doing all of the tawaf, the sa'i between Safa and Marwa. And then when it was said, look, have I fulfilled the right of my mother? Now, what happened? This person now went all the way from Yemen to Mecca, carrying his mother on his back, right? Not easy. Doing all of the rituals of Hajj. Again, not easy. It's hard enough just for one person to do it, let alone carrying your own mother. And so so they asked a sheikh, or they asked somebody, they said, have I fulfilled the rights of my mother? And the person said, you haven't even fulfilled the first scream that your mother gave when you were coming out. Not even that. Your parents have done so much for you. So much. When you and I were nothing, they were the ones taking care of us. You couldn't walk, you couldn't eat, you couldn't do anything by yourself. Right? And your parents are the one that took care of you. So the rights of the parents are extremely high. And we have this obligation from Allah to be obedient to them. So no matter what you think of the personality of your parents, whether you think they're just crummy people, you still have the obligation because Allah gave that obligation. And again, it goes back to loving Allah Azza wa Jal, to be kind and respectful to your parents. Allahu alam. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. come to that one later. Okay, fiqh question. If you can't make it to Jum'ah, prayer in a masjid, do you read Jum'ah at home or Dhuhr if there's no Jamaat? Basically, you will read Dhuhr. You cannot do Jum'ah by yourself. Okay? So I don't know if up to this point you were giving yourself a khutbah or anything, but you can't do that. All right? So you will pray Dhuhr if you happen to miss Jum'ah. Okay, is it haram to be gay? Okay. Before I get to that, look, there's something about, remember, we talked about desires, okay? And when it comes to this idea of being gay, about, having feelings or whatever for like the same gender, there's two ways a person could approach this. They could say, look, because I'm having these feelings, it must be right, okay? That's one way of approaching it, right? Because I'm having them, because they're so strong, because I'm attracted to whatever, they must be right. There's no way it could be wrong, all right? But then the issue comes up is, what about when you have feelings to do other things, right? If you have a feeling to steal, for instance, does that just make it right because you have the feeling to do it? No, right? Would it just because you feel like you want to kill somebody, right? Does it make it right? No matter what they did to you, does it make it right to just go and murder them? No, it doesn't, right? So just because there's a certain feeling there, and, because of the society we live in, the perversity of just sexual content, I mean, this idea of being gay or, being a homosexual, I mean, because of the fact that we're so inundated with sex, right? Starting from, like, cartoons, man. I mean, some of these Disney cartoons, it's like, wow, the sexual innuendos in these cartoons, it's insane, right? And little kids are watching this thing. So if you've been watching some of that since you're 6 years old, right, now you've grown up and now you're like, whatever, 15, 20, whatever it is, well, you've already been desensitized to any sort of sexual appetite you might have. So now you're starting to look at, okay, well, let's try to experiment a little bit, or whatever it might be. But the point is that, look, the environment we live in, it's not a question which I would say, like, look, how dare you ask such a question? Because it's something that's widespread. I mean, you're not the first ones to ask this question. It's been asked to many people. But the answer, again, is, look, that Allah Azza wa Jal, when He makes something forbidden, He does it for a wisdom. And when He makes something permitted, He does it for a wisdom. Okay? And that's the same thing with, like, fornication or whatever it may be, zina or whatever it is. So if you're in this state, the one thing I would say is, look, you have to be patient upon it, because Allah Azza wa Jal has made it haram. Allah destroyed a community of people, Qawm Lut, right? I'm sure you guys must have read about it, right? I mean, these people, they were so perverted. Basically, you remember the angels that came, and there were some really good-looking angels, and they came to the house of Lut alayhi salam, and basically, he was trying to be hospitable to them, and people, all of the people in the city started to basically gang up around the house and started banging on the door of Lut alayhi salam, saying, oh, let us in, you know what we want. Lut alayhi salam was like, look, there's women I have here. You can take them, right? His, perhaps his sisters or whatever, take them, but leave my guests alone. And of course, those guests were angels. And they told Lut alayhi salam, just take yourself and leave. And so when they left, these angels are the ones that basically destroyed that nation, right? Because of that. So yes, when you ask it's haram, yes, it's haram. Is it something where you'll be held accountable for the way you feel? No, you won't be held accountable for that. But you'll be held accountable if you act upon it, just like anything else. If you feel like stealing, you're not going to be held accountable for that. But you'll be held accountable once you actually go and you jack something from somebody. Does that make sense? All right. So that is that. Okay. What else do we have here? Okay, what if someone did istikhara and did not follow what they saw in it? Okay, let me get to istikhara real quick. First of all, how do you do istikhara? It's a dua, that's one thing. But specifically, the Prophet ﷺ said that, that when there's a certain issue that you're undecided about, pray 2 rak'ats and then make a certain dua to Allah. And I'll read you the translation because I think it's important. The translation of the dua is this: Oh Allah, I seek your guidance in making a choice by virtue of your knowledge, and I seek ability by virtue of your power, and I ask you of your great bounty. You have power, and I have none. And you know, and I do not know. And you are the knower of the hidden, of the unseen. O Allah, if in your knowledge this matter, this specific thing, is good for me, both in this world and in the hereafter, then ordain it for me, make it easy for me, and bless it for me. And if in your knowledge it is bad for me, and in my religion, and in my livelihood, and in my affairs, then turn me away from it, and turn it away from me, and ordain for me good, wherever it may be, and make me pleased with it. Okay, where in the dua does it say, oh Allah, show me a dream? Nowhere. Okay? So unfortunately, what has happened is, especially us who are from like the subcontinent, there's this idea of that, the way to make istikhara is you pray the 2 rakats, you make this dua, and then Allah will show you the correct answer in your dream. Okay? But realistically speaking, that's not what the Prophet ﷺ said, and that's not what the dua says. Right? The dua basically is saying that, look, if oh Allah, if you know something is good for me, then make it easy. And if you know it's something that's going to be bad for me, then just make it really tough and make it go away and make me happy with that decision, or make me happy with it. So in other words, the way to do istikhara, you pray the 2 rakats, you make this dua, and then you make a decision. Right? You have to make a decision in order to do that. And whatever decision you've made is in the qadr of Allah. That is what was supposed to happen. Right? Obviously. And that is how istikhara is done. Okay? So when we say like where was it? And what if they didn't follow what they saw in it? There's no aspect of not following. Basically, you make the dua, you make a decision, and that's basically your istikhara coming true or to pass or whatever. Okay. How should Muslims react to Osama Bin Laden's death? Is there a janazah necessary for this man? It's a good question, actually. Here's the thing, that look, what happens is that when something like this happens, basically people want to pigeonhole you into one corner or the other, right? Either you're rejoicing, yes, awesome, the greatest thing in the world, or you're completely, on the side of Osama bin Laden saying, yes, this is really great, and we basically agree with everything he did. But the reality of the matter is that it's not a cut and dry, like, yes, we love the fact that someone died. Because as a Muslim, no matter who dies, you're not supposed to rejoice at someone's death. Whoever it may be, as evil as they may be, right? You don't get up and start dancing and, doing all these things that, the guy died or whatever it may be, right? At the same time, certain things that Osama bin Laden did, that we have to say that, look, if it's wrong, it's wrong. We have to condemn it, right? So it's not a this or that, right? That should how should Muslims react? Frankly, how would you react when anybody dies? That should be your reaction, okay? Second thing, is there a janazah necessary for this person, for Osama bin Laden? Look, there is nothing that indicated that Osama bin Laden left the fold of Islam. Yes, some of the things he did were absolutely, horrible and, so on and so forth. But the point is that nothing was indicative of him leaving the fold of Islam. Okay? And if that's the case, then there is a janazah that's due upon him. And Allah knows best. Okay? All right. Okay. What is an Ahmadi Muslim? How do they differ from Sunni/Shia? Okay, an Ahmadi Muslim. I did cover that question? Okay. By the way, if you want more details on the Ahmadiyya, I have a lecture series online. I think it's on Vimeo, whatever that's called. And it's the 4th part. I go through in detail the beliefs of the Qadianis and the refutation of those beliefs, and the Brelvis. The Brelvis are the ones that believe that the Prophet ﷺ was literally light, like he was actually light, so he didn't have a shadow and all sorts of other funky stuff. So I go into detail in that video, in the 4th part, about basically what they say, what their quote-unquote proofs are, and what the responses to those proofs are. So you can check that out as well, inshallah. Okay. What are some of the rights a wife has over her husband? Okay, so you guys definitely need to be paying attention. All right. And I've actually just made a list. I'm not going to go through the proof of each one. That's like a whole lecture in and of itself. The first right that the wife has is protection. So it is upon her husband to offer her protection, just as you would typically imagine that that's the role of the man in the household, right? Being protected from physically, being protected from things, being protected from people's, saying things about her, so on and so forth. So the first one is protection. The second one is something called ghayra. Ghayra is something where it's a type of, you could say jealousy, but it's not. Jealousy is kind of a strong word, but basically it means that you actually care about what happens to your wife and, how people might perceive your wife, for instance, right? So you don't want people to think your wife is like loose or something like that, okay? So that's ghayra. Number 3, avoiding unnecessary suspicion. That should be the case with Muslims in general, but it's especially true with the wife, right? So it's one thing you want to have this attribute of ghayra, but at the same time you don't want to take it too far and start to suspect your wife. And that's why when the Prophet ﷺ used to come back from battles, he wouldn't, if it was nighttime, he wouldn't just walk into his house, right? He would wait till the morning time to go to his house, right? The reason being is because the idea was that, look, he doesn't want to come in there and have, because it's dark, they didn't have light at that time, so on and so forth. You don't want to have suspicions come to creep in, right, for whatever reason. So he would wait till the morning time. And similarly with us, when we come, the last thing you want to do is having any sort of suspicions about your wife. Okay? So avoiding unnecessary suspicion. Safeguarding her secrets. Okay? Unfortunately, in this society, a lot of the practices that some of the men do is they talk about stuff that goes on in the bedroom, right? Maybe defects about their whatever, or whatever it may be. Like, man, she got some nasty toes, or whatever it may be, right? Whatever it may be. But I'm saying that this is something, as a Muslim, you protect this about your wife. And by the way, vice versa, right? You don't, for the husband as well, you don't, women shouldn't go around and be like, yo, man, he's got a gut, or whatever it may be, whatever it may be. Okay? So protecting the secrets. Now, the bedroom secrets are one type of secrets, but even other things that the wife might do in the house or the husband might do in the house. This one goes both ways. Protecting the secrets of your spouse. Very important. Because shaitan will make you start to talk. All right. Number 5, financial support. The wife, basically, the way someone put it to me when I was first getting married is, look, man, your money is her money, and her money is her money. That's just straight up, right? So it's obligatory upon the husband to provide for his wife financially, in terms of food, clothing, medicine, whatever it may be. Now, one of the things I want to there's no cut and dry rule to say you have to give your wife X amount every year, okay? Because things change, standards change. But the way you look at it is that you look at your wife's standard of living and you kind of determine based on that, what was she already used to, okay? So based on that, it's upon you, based on the culture you're in, to give her a what's known as a reasonable standard of living. Now, there's no way to define reasonable, but it's basically the standard of living that she was generally, you could say, used to, okay? A reasonable dwelling, a place to live, basically. Obviously, you guys want to be like nomads. That's, The mahar. It's obligatory upon the husband to give the wife a mahar, a dowry, right? And it's not the other way around. I know a lot of cultures, especially from, South Asia, you find that it goes around the other direction. So the guy is actually expecting the wife and the wife's family to come up with like furniture and cars and all sorts of stuff. And, and the girl's family is basically taking out loans and becoming bankrupt just to finance the wedding and giving the dowry, quote unquote, to the guy. It actually works in the other direction. And let me qualify that. It doesn't work in the other direction for the guy's family to now become bankrupt to, give the wife something. But the point is that it has to be something that's given. And the value, again, is determined based on what's mutually agreeable. There's no sort of limit on it, per se, higher or lower. There was a companion who gave his wife at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, his mahar was teaching his wife portions of the Quran. That was the mahar, right? But it has to be something of value. Okay. Number 8, kind treatment. And that kind of goes without saying. This is something that Allah Azza wa Jalla has obligated upon the husband and, of course, upon the wife, that you treat your wife kindly. And that's kind of logical. Looking at the wife's better side. Now, if you want to really extend this, Women are going to do certain things that are annoying, and men are going to do certain things that are really annoying as well. Okay? I know guys don't like to think so, but believe me, we can be really annoying. All right? Basically, this goes in both directions as well. Looking at your wife's better side, you're looking at your spouse's better side, right? That if there's something going on, something that really annoys you, take a step back and don't dwell on it, okay? Because there is much good in your spouse. As Allah Azza wa Jalla has told us specifically about the women, that there's certain things that you might dislike about them, but Allah Azza wa Jalla has placed so much good in them, right? So in other words, that you should overlook those things that annoy you in both directions, okay? Entertaining the wife, all right? That's a responsibility that the man has, is to entertain the wife. Now, how you want to go about doing that, that's up to you. Just by extension, one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ explicitly mentioned was about foreplay, that the man shouldn't come to the woman as a camel comes to another camel. Okay, basically you just come in, do your thing, and bounce. That's not what's meant here, right? And in other words, look, that there has to be some level of foreplay. And you might be thinking, all right, we're sitting in a masjid, how dare you talk about it? The Prophet ﷺ spoke about it, so I'm not going to apologize for that, okay? In other words, that one of the things that is expected of you from yourselves to your wives is that there's a foreplay, so that that sort of the sex is enjoyable for both of you. Let's just be very blunt, okay? All right. Giving salam to the family and the wife when you come in the house, it's a responsibility of the husband to give the salam. Fairness and justice. Look, one of the dynamics that when you do get married, if you're not married, is that you will have issues amongst your families. And it's guaranteed. If you don't, alhamdulillah. But you will have issues between your families, okay? The thing to remember is that while your mother is your mother and your father is your father, and they have rights, but you have a right to be just to your wife, and justice is what trumps all of that. You must be just. If you're in a situation where it's almost as if your wife's pit against your parents, don't just think, I have to be good to my parents, and no matter what my wife says, I'm going to side with my parents. Because sometimes, right, what happens is the parents, out of their love for their child, whatever it may be, might go a little overboard, okay? And that's something that as the man of the household, the husband, you have to be able to balance that and look at, all right, what is fair and what is just. Are they about to pray? Okay. Let me give you the last one. Number 13 is if you have more than one wife, fairness between the wives. We'll end it at that. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.